All right, Photoshop part 2. We had just started talking about the layers panel and noticing that now that we've just created a new file, there is one layer, it's called the background, and it's locked. What you will notice if you grab a brush tool, you can start to paint directly on that layer. However, if I want to create a new layer, if I come down here with this little square with bent corner, it kind of looks like a sticky note, and when you hover over it, you see it gives you the option to create a new layer. If I create a new layer, I can't drag any layer below the background layer. That's kind of like your anchor. It's the lowest level. You can't go any further down than that one. So just note that as we start to work with more and more layers, be very aware of your background layer and what you do on it, as that will be the lowest that you can go. Unless you convert that to a regular layer, which is one of the first things that I always do. So I'm actually going to go back with Control Z, then Alt Control Z to go back multiple steps. And I'm going to click this lock icon, and that unlocks it. It transforms it from the background layer that's anchored as the lowest one to now, if I make multiple layers, you can see that I'll be able to move those interchangeably. So starting back with, I'm going to delete that just so you can kind of see that process again. Starting back with this former background layer that we unlocked and is now just a regular layer, a couple things I want you to know as well. How to name a layer. This is going to be really important for staying organized and something that I will try and drill into as a habit. All you've got to do is double click on the name of a layer and you can type in whatever you want to label that as. And again, it's not going to seem like much now, but when you have 15 layers that you're working with, naming them will become very important. I'm just calling it white because obviously it's a solid white layer. Also notice, when I move my mouse over this layer or onto our canvas, it gives me that little strike through circle, like no you can't. It says it can't complete the request because no layers are selected. So if you notice, when I try to click here and that comes up, this layer is actually not selected. So in Photoshop's mind, it doesn't know what I'm trying to select or what I'm trying to do. So before you do anything, make sure that A, you have a layer selected, and B, it's the layer that you actually want to be working on. This will be important again when you have lots and lots of layers. So I'm going to, just for the sake of showing you kind of, again, a little bit about how this works, I'm going to draw something on this layer. It's just going to be a blob. And I'm going to come down here to make a new layer. When I click that, you'll see that a layer pops up above our white layer, and the background is different in these thumbnails. So if you can kind of see over here, there's a checkered background, whereas white is solid white. That means that this layer is transparent. So what I just did is I turned off, or I hid our white layer by clicking that little eyeball icon. When that's hidden, you can see this checkered layer all over your canvas, and that just means that this layer is transparent. So I can still draw on it, I can still do all my normal stuff, but it's going to show up on top of that white layer. And again, you can see I'm just turning things off and on. I'll make it a little easier to see by changing the color as well. So I've selected my layer 1, which I'm going to call, it red. I don't know, because I'm going to change the color in a second. So I've selected that layer. On my keyboard, I'm going to do Control A, which is the shortcut to select all. And you can find that in the menu by going up here to select all, and it'll show you the shortcuts on the right. So select all. And I am just going to delete what was formerly on that layer. You know you have something selected, by the way, when you see these little marching ants. So when I did Control A to select all and I see these little dots moving around, I have the whole canvas selected. But because I was only on this layer, it only deleted that one stroke that I'd made. It didn't delete anything from other layers. So now the reason that I named this red, I'm just going to change my color so you can see some differentiation. So I've got my paintbrush. I'm also going to increase the size of my paintbrush just to mess with this. So up here, this little icon, you'll see a dot and a number and a drop-down arrow. These are your brush options or your brush settings. I can change the size of my brush. Hardness just means how fuzzy or sharp the edge is. So if I'm turning up the hardness, the edge of my brush is getting harder and harder or sharper. So when I'm all the way up, hardness is at the maximum, you can see the difference between those two shapes. This has a very sharp edge, this has a soft, blurry edge. Okay, so now I'm on my red layer and I still have the entire thing selected. I'm on my red layer. If I were to delete that again, it deletes everything on the red layer. I'm going to do Control Z to go back, but whatever layer you are on, and if you have everything selected, it's only going to delete stuff from that layer. If I don't want things selected, or I want to deselect, you can come up here to select, deselect. The shortcut is Control D. Use the shortcuts whenever possible. Time is money in the real world, and time is valuable to you too, even now in high school. So anything you can do to be faster and more efficient, do it. And shortcuts are a huge part of that. So Control A to select everything. I can delete if I want. And then to deselect, get these marching ants to go away, Control D. All right. I'm going to draw one more time on this so you can kind of see how layers work in case you are still not quite sure. Right now you can see that this little blob I drew, the red one, is on top of the blue lines. If I grab the red layer and move it below the white layer, in the thumbnail you can see our red blob is still there, but because the white layer with the blue drawings on it is solid, it's not transparent, we can't see through it. If I hide that, we can see our red layer again. I'm going to make one more layer. I'll call this green. And I'm going to come over here to my foreground color and change that to green. So if I'm on the green layer, I can draw in green. And because that layer is physically above the red layer, the green is physically above the red. I can change that by dragging, like holding down on the green layer and dragging until I see that white line come below the red layer. When I let go, now you can see the little green X is below that red blob. So the order of your layers matters greatly. And again, it's not too hard to manage when you just have, 2 or 3 layers, but once you have 15, the order is definitely going to be something you need to pay attention to. If I turn the top layer back on, the white one, none of this is going to show because this is solid white and it's on top. But as I start to move these layers above each other, then it starts to overlap. Now the white is on the bottom. So I know this is not beautiful by any means, but hopefully it gives you at least some idea of how layers are going to work. So now let's actually open a photo real quick. I'm going to show you, and then from there you can have some time to experiment before we get into our first official lesson. Just for fun, I'm going to select A and delete everything on the red. Ooh, this is a good point. Green is on top, but because I had the red layer selected, it deleted red. So notice I have everything selected. I did Control A. I'm on the white layer and I click delete. Even though it's not the top layer, it's the one I have selected. It's highlighted here in bright gray and it deleted everything from that one. So again, make sure you know what layer you have selected. It's the right layer and what order it is in, you should be aware of. Okay. I'm just going to close this file, and you can do that by coming up here to this little tab. It's just calling it untitled because we haven't saved it or given it a name yet. This is like a tab like in Chrome when you have multiple different tabs up at the top. It's the same thing. So when I close this one, I'm going to tell it no, I don't want it to save because obviously it's not anything special. Okay, how to open a file. This is actually probably a good place for me to pause, and I'll start part 3, opening a photo in the next one.